This conference will now be recorded.
In yesterday's session, we were discussing about what is monolithic architecture versus microservice architecture. As I already told, it's nothing to do with the Docker containers or Docker Swarm or Kubernetes. It's basically a developmental technique or approach. Application teams can follow monolithic or microservices to develop the applications. But we discussed what is the advantages when we go with microservices and also the challenges which comes with microservices and how can we overcome those challenges. As I already told, if your applications are being developed as a microservices, what is the best way to run your microservices, or what is the best place or way to run your microservices is basically containers. So containers are the best way to run your microservices. As I already told, is it mandatory to run your microservices as containers? No, but it's it's very well work with containers. It's very well work with containers. So it's a good place to run microservices as containers. As I already told, if let's take you are working for LIC India, this LIC India application, just to give an example. So this application I'm talking about. As a LIC of India, will they have a lot of requirements for end users? I mean to say the guys who is taking the insurance from LIC, who is paying the premiums, who is claiming the LIC policies. For all these things, they might have some requirements. So will they hire some business analyst and will they explain what is the application requirement for LIC and what use cases or what features they want in LIC? So they will hire one company or they may have one BA, business analyst. He will analyze the business requirements and he will draft the requirements. Does that BA will sit with the technical team like technical architect, the architect of one company, maybe LIC itself may have some IT people, or LIC if doesn't have a software people, LIC give these requirements to some other some other service based company like TCS, Infosys or Wipro. So they will give these requirements to that company. They will hire that company for that project. And as a technical team from that company, will they work on the requirements of this LIC application and they will write the code for the as per their requirements? Yes. So the developers will sit and write. So if they are following microservices architecture, let's consider LIC has a lot of use cases. End users are going to use LIC, and also agents. Does LIC will also you have a agents? I mean to say agents who works on behalf of LIC to encourage and use promote their products. They will get a commission based on the number of policies they are making. So for them also they may have some application, agent based applications. The agents who is going to use some application and end users will use some application. So if they are using microservices architecture, will they have hundreds of microservices like login one microservice, registration one microservice, and claiming the LIC is one microservice, renewing LIC, renewing policy one microservice, downloading invoice or paying the premium like this, they will have hundreds of microservices. So if that application has hundreds of microservices, let's say, as I already told, if there are hundreds of microservices, let's consider 100 just to give a number. If there are 100 microservices, how many code base we will have? How many code repositories, SCM repositories we will have? 100. For each microservice, one repository. Then will it generate 100 packages that can be Java package or Python package or Node.js package, whatever programmatic language they are using? That doesn't matter. Those many packages. And if I want to use the CI/CD, because managing these many code bases, building and deploying these many applications, these many microservices manually, is it possible? Manually, it takes a lot of time. So that's where CI/CD comes. Continuous integration, continuous delivery, all those things. So if the DevOps practice is followed in this project, if the DevOps practices are followed in this project, so if there is a DevOps practices, DevOps team available for this project and they are following DevOps methodology, continuous integration, continuous delivery, automation. So if I have a pipelines created, whenever there is a change in any microservice, any code, any microservice, any repository, if I have a pipeline created, is that pipeline is going to continuously get that code, integrate that code and deploy that code, whether it's a virtualized deployment or container deployment, whether you are using cloud, whether you are using on-prem, that doesn't matter. Whether you are using cloud, whether you are using on-prem, whether you are using virtual machines to run, or whether you are using containers to run, that doesn't matter. Will be able to automate using pipelines, using Jenkins? Yes. So if LIC is not ready to host their application in cloud like AWS or Azure or GCP, then will they have their own data center set up in some location in India? They will have their own virtual machines. Then we can connect to those servers and apply the applications. If they are ready to host applications in cloud, can we use any cloud based on their use case? Can we go with AWS cloud or Azure cloud and provision required servers, storage, networks, and apply these applications? Yes. So this is already discussed, but in the interviews, if they are asking, you are not able to explain. That is why I'm repeating this multiple times. In the interview, they are asking, if they are asking these type of questions, you are coming back and saying, sir, in the interview, they are asking real-time question. They're asking some scenario-based question or real-time question. There is nothing called real-time. Everything is a requirement. So you need to explain in a proper way. What is DevOps? Why DevOps? Why DevOps? What is infrastructure? What is network? What is microservice? What is monolithic? What is database? What is load balancer? Why do we need all these things? They are going to ask these things only. But you should be able to convey. That is very, very important. Is everyone clear? Whatever has been discussed so far? Now let's continue with the Docker. Let's continue with the Docker concept again. Docker networks. We already have a networks in the server level, virtual machines. If you are using AWS, what is networking in AWS? VPC. So VPC is a virtual private cloud. It's a private network in AWS. It's a private network in AWS in which you can place your AWS resources. Your AWS resources. Resources are services like EC2, EFS, auto scaling groups, EFS, auto scaling groups, RDS, etc. Guys, is S3 is created under any VPC? Is S3 created under any VPC? No. Is EBS also created under any VPC? While creating a EBS, are we selecting any network? No. So like EC2, EFS, auto scaling group, RDS, and load balancers. When I'm creating ELB, am I selecting in which VPC, in which network? While creating ELB also, we selected all these things, right? So this is VPC. VPC is nothing but a network, server networking. If you are not using AWS, let's say you are using Azure. Do we have a similar concept in the Azure also? Networking. So in Azure, we call it as a VNet. Here in AWS, we call it as a VPC. In Azure, we call it as a VNet. But is it similar to the VPC? Basically, VNet is nothing but a virtual network. Yes. Suppose you are not at all using cloud. You are using your own data center. In the data center also, do you have a networking concept? Your servers will be connected with each other using physical cables, switches, routes, all those things. So this is server networking. But what is this Docker networks? So in networking, hardware networking. This is hardware networking. In the servers, whatever we use, hardware networking. So are we going to use cables to connect each and every device, like a physical cables, switches, routes, routers, hubs, etc. So using these devices, we will create a network. But in the AWS, we are just using VPC. But who is having all these physical cables, switches, routers, hubs in the background in the data center? Who is purchasing all these things and creating a network in the background? AWS. Now, when it comes to Docker, also we have a network. When it comes to Docker, also we have a network. This is software networking, kind of a software networking. What does it mean? Whenever I am creating any containers, does container also belongs to some network in the Docker? This is my server. This is my server. I have some virtual machine. I have some operating system, host operating system. I have a Docker here. I have a Docker here. I have a Docker here. Now, when I am creating a network, when I am creating a containers, even though containers are in a same machine, do we have these containers in some network? That is software networking. Within this machine, even though I am creating a container like this, each container will be created in some network, some Docker network, kind of a software networking. But under the hood, does this server also have a networking concept? If this server is in same network where I have another server, does this server can connect with this server? That is server networking. So this can be your database server. This can be your DB server. Suppose I installed my database directly in this server. I installed my database directly in this server. So I have MySQL installed or MongoDB installed. Your application, you can directly do the virtual deployment like this. You can directly do the virtual deployment like this. Instead of containers, you can directly deploy your application. Now, if your application is trying to read and write the data to the database, does these two servers should be in same network? Do we need to have a routes between this application server and database server so that this application can talk to the database for reading and writing the data? Yes. But your application server is in different network. Your database server is in different network. There is no internet. There is no internet because, as I already told, are you going to create your database servers, application servers in public subnet with internet access? No. So if you don't have an internet and these two are in two different networks, again, does your application server will be able to talk to database server if this is in different server networking and this is in different? No. In that case, do you need to connect these two networks, the network in which this server is there and the network in which this server is there? Do you need to connect again? Then it will work. Now similarly, let's say this is my use case. I am using Docker. My application is running as a container. My application is running as a container. The container which is running in this machine, will it able to talk to the database? If this Docker server and database server is in same network, or the VPC peering concept is there, your application is running as a container. Does this container will be able to talk to this database server, even though your database is running as a server? If there is a networking between these two servers, then your container can talk to the database also. This is server networking. But now let's say there is a container networking also. Whenever we are creating a containers, the containers are getting created in some Docker network. Now, if this container and this container is running in a same machine also, if this container and this container running in a same machine, if this one and this one is in two different Docker networks, this container and this container is in two different Docker networks, again, even though they are running in same machine, does this container will be able to communicate with this container? If this is in different Docker network, this is in different Docker network, will they able to communicate with each other? No. So in Docker also there is a networking concept. In the Docker also there is a networking concept, kind of a software networking. So by default, we have three networks, three Docker networks. By default, we have three Docker networks created. What is those? Anyone has any idea? What are the three Docker networks by default we will be having? One is bridge network, another one is host network, another one is none or null. Another one is none or null. Now, while creating a container, did I mention in which Docker network that container has to be created? While creating a container so far, did I mention in which Docker network that container has to be created? No. So then what is the default Docker network in which containers gets created by default? So by default, the containers get created in this network, default network. Let me show you. Let me show you. Let me show you. Let me connect to maybe this server where I have some containers, deployment server in which I have deployed some containers. Let me connect to that machine. Now, if you see Docker network ls. So how many networks are there by default? Docker network ls. The way we can see the images, the way we can see the containers. If I want to see the networks in Docker, what command I have to use? Docker network ls. So how many networks I have by default here? 3. The network name. The name of the network is bridge. The name of the network is bridge. Driver is bridge. The name of the network is host. The driver is host. Network driver. Bridge driver. Host driver. The name of the network is none. The driver is null. So by default, we have 3 networks. And I created some containers. I created some containers already. While creating these containers, any container, did I mention network name as of now? Did I use any network name? So when I am doing docker create or when I am using docker run, I was not using any option. So I was using only these options as of now. Name of the container, port mapping if you want to do the port publish, and we were using image tag. If you want to set any CPU limit, you can use hyphen CPUs, hyphen memory. If you want to set a CPU and memory, if you want to pass any environment variables, you can use hyphen E key and value of that environment variable like this. Only these options we used. Did I mention any network name in which network this container has to be created and started? No. So by default, in which network it is getting created? How can I see? Can I inspect my container and see? Can I inspect my container and see the networking of that container? If you see the container networking, in which network the container is created, under networks, you can see bridge. In which network the container is created? Bridge. So what is this IP address? What is this IP address? Is it your server IP address or is it your container IP address? It is your container IP. Now let's consider I created one more container, one more microservice. Let's say this is login microservice. Let's say this is login microservice. I deployed that application here. And I have one more microservice. Let's say products microservice, just to give an example. Or this is my UI microservice where I have my presentation code. This is my login microservice, login APIs. Now, in this UI microservice, there are APIs created in this microservice like authenticate API. So if this one and this one is running in a same Docker network, does this microservice can make any network call? Network call, basically API call. Does this microservice will be able to make any network call or API call to this microservice if this one and this one is running in a same Docker network? But let's consider this is running in a different Docker network. This is running in a different Docker network. Even though both are running in a same machine, does this container can communicate with this container using container IP? Does each container will have its own IP? Something like this. Now, let's consider this is running in a different Docker network. Let's consider this is running in a different Docker network. Now, this container is running on port 8080. Now, from this microservice, if they are making any API call, network call, something like this, that container IP and on which port your API, your application is running, and that application context. Even though the UI developer is using this like this, he is using this in the code to make a API call to this one, does this container can communicate with this container if they are in two different Docker networks? Does this guy will be able to communicate with this guy? Network, container networking. Are you going to get a connection timed out kind of a stuff? Connection timed out. So if I want to troubleshoot, then can I go inside this container and do something like this? Network troubleshooting curl -v telnet this IP address and that port, that container port. If I do like this, if it is saying connected, then which means do we have a networking between this container and this container? If it is saying connected, if it is saying it is connected, then which means you have a network. If it is saying connection refused, which means does this container can communicate with this one? Not only container, let's say you have a database running like this. You have a database running like this. So if your container is trying to talk to this database, can I go and check whether this within this container, if my application is using this database server IP? Let's say this is my database server IP. This is my database server IP. Mongo database is running. If it is a Mongo database, on which port Mongo database will run? On which port Mongo database will run? Anyone has any idea? 27017. Now, if this application, let's consider this microservice, this login API is trying to communicate with the database to read and write the data. Now, if this is not having a network with this one, does your application layer will be able to connect with the database layer, data layer, if there is no network again? No. So can I go inside this and see? Can I go inside this and see whether I will be able to talk to that server also? Can I do something like this? curl-v telnet. This server IP I will use. This server IP I will use, and that port 27017. But this is server networking, container to the server. But in this case, in whatever machine I have this container, if this machine and this machine has a network, then does this work? Does this container will be able to communicate with this server? If this server has a network with this server, then does this container will be able to talk to this one? Yes. This is container to the server. This is container to the server. But within the container also, do we have a networking? Within the container also, do we have a networking? Yes. Which means even though containers are running, there is a network. If this container and this container is in two different networks, is this container will be able to talk to this container if they are in two different networks, even though both are running in the same machine? No. If it is in a same network, does this will make a network call? That can be network call or API call. Will it work? Yes. Let me show you. Let me show you. Let me create a one more container. Let me create a one more container. Something like this. I'm creating one more container. You consider this is a microservice. You consider this one is one microservice. You consider this one is one microservice. Let's consider this one is one microservice. Now, while creating this one also, I didn't mention any network. While creating this container also, I have not mentioned any network. So this container also created in which network by default? That default bridge. That default bridge. And this is also created in which network? The other container also created in which network? Same, that default bridge. Now, let me go inside one of the container. Let me go inside one of the container. Let me go inside one of the container. Something like this I am doing. Now from this container, will I able to communicate with any API? If some application APIs are deployed in this container, if there is a database running in this container, will I able to communicate with that application or database? Will I able to reach that one? Now, if you see, I am just using this one to test curl-v telnet. That container IP. That container IP we already know. That is this. Now on which port this container is running? What is the container port of this one? On which port this application or container is running? This one I am talking about, Python. Which port? No, your Python process is running on which port? 5000. Now, if you see from this application, from this container, will I able to reach this container now? If you see. Now let's say there are some APIs. There are some APIs developed. From this application, will I able to make a API calls to this application also? If the developer has written some APIs, will they able to consume those APIs which is part of this microservice? Let me show you. I can do something like this also, just to show that there are some APIs. Am I getting some response from this API? Something is running on the root context. Am I getting a response like app works, which means in this microservice code, can I write a code to invoke this microservice, which is part of this application? Does one microservice will be able to communicate with other microservice using REST APIs? And if they're running in a same network in the Docker, will they able to communicate with each other? There is another API also, something like this, /API/tasks, /API/tasks. Now, do you see, is that API is giving some response? Can I use this response in this microservice to do some logic? Can I use this response in this microservice to process and do something as a developer? Now there are post calls also. If I want to post, guys, you can use this curl for testing your APIs also. I think I already explained. Can I use Postman to test these REST APIs? I think what is Postman also I have explained. Can I use Postman to do some kind of a testing? I think I have already explained this Postman. I'm not sure. So what is Postman? This is one REST client. Like MobiXterm is what, guys? MobiXterm is what? That is SSH client. Using that MobiXterm, will I able to SSH to my servers using MobiXterm? Yes. Similarly, if I want to test some REST APIs, as a developer, as a DevOps engineer, you want to test whether your APIs are running or not. Will I able to do that using Postman? That is one REST client. Now here you can do the testing. But here, if I use my container IP like this, that container port, that API path, will it work? Because this is from my laptop, that Postman is running in my laptop. Will I able to reach this IP on this port from my laptop? No. But instead of this IP, can I use my host IP and host port if I want to access from outside Docker? From outside Docker, you have to reach. Guys, this use case. Let's say you have another server. You are running one application in this server. Maybe that is directly in this server, you are running one application. Is this possible? From one more server, will you able to reach your API using that container IP and that port? Is this possible? From another server, is it possible to reach this one? No. Using container IP. But if I have done the host port mapping, can I use that server IP? Can I use that server IP and server port, that host IP and host port? If I have done the host mapping, this IP, and that whatever host port. So let me cancel this request. Let me send now. Now, if you see, am I getting a response from that API? Kind of a API testing. Will I able to do API testing whether my APIs are working fine using this Postman as a developer, or as a DevOps guy also? Sometimes you may need to see whatever application you deployed, is that application working fine? But if you don't know what API to test, what is the, whether it's a get call, post call, if it is a post call, what is the request body, what is the headers to be passed? As a DevOps engineer, you don't know. So whom you should contact to see whether it's a get call or post call, what is the request body to be passed, what is the headers to be passed, whom should you contact? You have to contact developer, so the developer will give all those details. Now, this is from my laptop, but if this same microservice is being invoked from another microservice, same microservice is being used from another microservice like this. Now, from here to here, whether it is working fine or not, if I want to test, can I use Postman within this container? Or can I install Postman within the container? Or do I need to install Postman in the Linux server? Will I able to install Postman in the Linux server? Will I able to use that Postman for testing? No. In that case, can I use curl or wget? Can I use curl or wget to invoke those APIs again for troubleshooting? For troubleshooting. Let's say this is not happening. This is not happening. You are getting you are getting some errors. Then can I go inside this container like this? Can I go inside that container like this, or server? If your application is running as a container, go inside the container. But if your application is deployed in directly virtual machine, can I do the same from that virtual machine instead of container? Sometimes in the interview they are asking, how do you troubleshoot that 404 errors, 500 errors of REST APIs? So can I go inside that container or server using curl or wget? Will I able to see whether I am getting 400, whether I am getting 200, 204, 404 like that? Now you see what is the status code it is returning when I am making this API call. What is the HTTP status code it is returning? 200. So am I getting a response from that API? Yes. That is possible because is this container and the other container is in same network where my API is running? Yes. Now let's say I'm using something like this. What is the meaning of 405, guys? I am using task. What is the meaning of 405? Method not allowed. So this is a get call. This is a get call I am doing, but that method is actually a post call. So it will only allow post. Let me show you the code. 405 indicates method not allowed. Let me show you the code also. That Node.js code, not Node.js, Python. That Python code. The developer of that application, if you see API/task, what method it is? What type of method that API? API/task post. So if it is a post call, I am trying to do a get call here. So is that will allowed? Does API will allow to get the data from post call? No. Suppose if I give something wrong, which is not at all there, I am doing something like this /API/tasks. What is this 404 indicates? What is this 404 indicates? Page not found, API not found, page not found, or API not found. Do I have such API? Do I have such API running on that container on this port? No. If I give correct API like this, tasks/API/tasks, so /API/tasks, am I getting some response in the form of JSON? Is it returning that API can communicate with the database and fetch this data if required? That Python API can communicate with the database and get the data, or from anywhere? Now, if I want to post some data, can I use post call with a request body? Suppose task, I am saying post, but I am not passing any body in the this post call. Will I get some errors? What this 400 indicates, guys? What this 400 indicates? HTTP status code 400 indicates what? Bad request. So it is expecting some request body, but I am not passing. Now, let me pass some data. So these are basically REST APIs. So can I use the data? Can I pass the data in the JSON format? These are REST APIs. The data will be exchanged between these APIs using JSON. Unified language. Unified language, which means even though I have written my APIs using Java, even though I am having a APIs using Python, does each API can communicate with other API using JSON format? Can they exchange the data between one API to another API using JSON, unified language? That is REST API. Now let me pass some data like this. I am passing some data. I am inserting some data. Can we invoke these APIs from any UI also? From presentation code, I am expecting this field, I am expecting this field. As a UI developer, can I accept all these things as a input fields? And can I create a data like this and invoke this API to persist as a from UI as a developer? Now, let me say something like this. I have task, let's say task 4. I'm saying something like this, task 4. Just some dummy data, guys. Just some dummy data. Now this is post call. This is with request body. Headers, I am passing type, that body type as JSON, the JSON. Now if you see, I think I have to give one more something like this. I think I need to give. Let me try. No, 1 second. I need to check the code. So it is expecting, okay, under task. So this has to be something like this. Guys, whom you will contact to know what is the body to be passed if you don't know? Whom you will contact, what body to be passed, what headers to be passed if you don't know? The developer. You will contact the developer. Now I am posting this call. Now am I getting 200 response with that data being inserted also? With the data being inserted and processed? Now if I do get call now, if I do get call, whatever data is persisted using this post call, will I get that data? If I do a get call, if that is being inserted in the database, this get call will communicate with the database and get the data if it is saved in the database. Now can I see that data? Again, whatever that task 4 I have inserted. Now similarly, let me post some additional data. From UI, can I accept these fields, whatever fields? Can I farm the data like this in the UI layer and make a API call to this application layer so that that application layer will receive this data, validate the data and process the data? Yes. The developer will take care. Now can I see that is happening now? Can I see that is happening now like this? Now if this is not happening, can I do this using curl also? Can I use this post call also using curl? So you can do something like this. You can get the curl request for the same. You can get the curl request for the same. Can I execute within that container also whether it is working or not? Can I do like this? But let me use this hyphen manual. I'll remove all these things. Where is that hyphen manual? Curl for the same. Let me remove this location. I am doing the curl like this. within the container because I don't have a postman. Hyphen hyphen data. This is not valid. Instead of this, I think I can use request body. This is curl option, guys. You no need to worry about this. So that options are not correct. Now I can use hyphen D, something like this. Hyphen D also. That hyphen D stands for data, I guess. Now let me use hyphen D. Hyphen X post. This request also I can use hyphen X some option like this. Let me do like this. Now if you see, is it working now? If you see, you can use hyphen V also. If you want to see the headers of that one, you can use hyphen V also, something like this. Now if you see, is that post call is giving a response back again saying 200 with the data being inserted. So can I use this kind of commands also to do the troubleshooting if one application is not able to communicate with other application from the servers or from the containers also? Can I test? Can I troubleshoot whether it is able to reach or not using this curl or wget like this? This is also very important, guys. This is also very important. Troubleshooting also is very important. Now will I able to see whether do I have a network issue? Do I have any other issue between these two APIs? If that API is not able to communicate with this API, will I able to troubleshoot whether it's a network issue, whether it's an application issue or any other issue? Now, if the developers are using wrong ports, let's say instead of 5000, let's say developer is using 8080, but will it work in this case? Maybe you are using container IP also. You can use that container IP because within the container you can use that container IP. So if I do something like this, do you think will it work? If the developer is using something like this, why I am getting connection refused? Because in this container, do I have this port accepted, this port listening? No. So can I simply do this one also, whether it will connect or it will say connection refused, something like this, curl hyphen v telnet. It is connection refused. So if the developer is making a API calls like this, will it work again? You can just verify like this also. But is it accepting on 5000? That is your container port. Is it able to talk to that? Now, can I use 5000 here? Can I use 5000 here now? This is also very important, guys. Troubleshooting. Now, is this application is able to make a call to other application? Both are running as a containers. Yes. That is how it works. Since both are in a same network. That is default network. That is default network. Now, what is the problem in default network, right? The default bridge network. In default bridge network, containers can communicate with each other using IP addresses, using only IP addresses. Only IP addresses. It cannot communicate using host names. That host names is basically kind of a DNS names, container names. It cannot communicate using container names. So that container name is nothing but a kind of a host name or DNS within the Docker. Kind of a host name or DNS within the Docker. Within the Docker. So this is how it works. In the default bridge network. Now IP is working, but instead of IP, will I able to use this name that is your container name or host name or DNS name within the Docker? Now, if you see, just I'm doing this telnet, that name and the port. Is this name is result to IP of that container? Is this name is result to IP of that container in the default network? No. But when I am using IP, is it able to communicate and resolve? When I am using something like this, that is the IP of that container. Now, if I do something like this, it will work. If I do something like this, it will work. But same thing, if I use name, is that API, am I able to access that API using that name, that container name or host name? Python app. Is it working? No. So it will work only using IPs, not using names. So what is the problem if I use IPs? Is container IPs are static? Does container IP will remain same if the container is deleted and recreated? Are you going to get a same IP for that container? Container IPs are not static. Container IPs are dynamic. If the container is deleted and recreated, your IPs will change. Let's say you are making a call like this. You are making a call like this. Something like this, 17.0.2, that 5000. You are making some call like this. You are making some call like this. So this is running. This is running like this. Let's say on 5000 port it is running. Let's say you are making a call to this one. It is going to work. The developer is using this one in this application code. He is using like this. It will work. But for some reason there is a change in this API. So you deleted a container. You recreated a container again. Do you have a guarantee that again this container will get same IP? Your IP may change. If your IP is changed, again, if the developer in this microservice is using this like this, again will it work? If the IP is changed, will it work again? No. In that case, again we need to modify this code, and again do I need to reply, do I need to deploy this one again? Modify the IP address in this code and deploy again? Yes. But do you think is that correct in the container world? One microservice will communicate with other microservices, other lot of microservices. Containers will be deleted, recreated for many reasons. This is not the correct way. So that is where there is a custom network. That is where there is a custom networks available in the Docker. The way we have a default bridge network, if required, can I create a custom bridge network? We can create custom bridge network. What is the meaning of custom bridge network? Your own network. Your own network using bridge driver. Using bridge driver, you can create your own network. Your own network. So if my containers are created in a custom bridge network, then does this DNS resolution with that container names will work within the Docker? Within the Docker, does one container will be able to communicate with other container if they are in a custom bridge network? Within the Docker, it will work. That resolution will work within the Docker, but will I able to use that container name from outside the Docker from a different machines or different systems? No. But within the Docker machine, will it able to resolve the IP of that container using that name, that host name or DNS name? Yes. We can create a custom bridge network if required. So how to create a network now? What is the command to create a network now? Docker network create -d. What this -d stands here when we are creating a network? What is this -d stands here? Driver. My network name. My network name. So can I create some network like this? Docker network create -d. The driver is bridge. The driver is bridge. Can I say network name like this? Your application name also. Python app bridge like this, or Mithun Tech. Your application name. Mithun Tech app bridge like this. Some name for the network. Can I give something like this? Network name. So while creating a container, can I mention this name, network name? When I am doing this docker create or run, can I use this option -network, that network name like this? While creating a container using docker create or run, can I use this option -network, that network name? That network name, whatever network you created, in that network will you be able to create and start your containers with the rest of the other options, image option, name of the container, container name, port mapping if required, other options, whatever options, something like this. Now, if I use this option, does that containers will be created in whatever network I want to create those containers like this? If the containers are created in a custom bridge network, let's say both microservices, both containers, both applications are running in a same custom bridge network, does one microservice, one container will be able to communicate with other container using the container name itself rather than container IP? Even though your container is deleted, even though this container is deleted and recreated with a different IP, can you still access using that name instead of IP? Here, if I am using name instead of IP in this code, I am using a name. Even though container is deleted and recreated with a different IP also, is that matters now? If container IPs are getting changed also, if I am using name here, something like this, that container name, can it still access this one? Yes. Do we have a control on the names? Do we have a control on the names for the containers? Can you give whatever name you want to give? Can I use that name for communication from other containers, other microservices, if they're in the same network? So this way, can I communicate one application with other application? Can I invoke APIs of one application from other application? Can I invoke APIs from one microservice to other microservice? If they are running as a containers, can I use that name? Communication between the containers or services? Yes. So let me create a network. Let me come out of this container. By default, how many networks we have? We already saw that by default, how many networks we have? 3. Now, can I create one network like this? Docker network create -d driver. This is my driver. This is my driver. Can I give whatever name, your application name, or some name, some meaningful name? I am giving something like this, some meaningful name. So with this name, does network will be created with the help of this driver? This is my network driver, bridge driver. Even though I don't use -d, what is the default driver while creating a network? Even though I don't mention -d, that driver name. What is the default driver for the network? Which driver it will use to create a network? Bridge. Guys, if you observe the interview question, anytime did you have these type of questions in the interview also? What is bridge network? How many networks you have by default in Docker? I think these questions also asked in the interview. If you went through the interview questions, whatever we already shared, do you have these type of questions also in the list? How many networks you have by default in the Docker? What is the default network? We have these type of things. Now I created a network. Can I see one more network now? Can I call this as a custom bridge network? Because I created on my own. If required, can I inspect the network also? The way I am inspecting container or image, if required, can I inspect the network also? Docker network inspect, that network name or ID. Whether it's a container, whether it's a image, whether it's a network, whether it's a value, who is assigning the IDs? For images, containers, networks, volumes, Docker daemon. Now I can do like this. Docker network inspect, I can use ID or name. If you see, what is this subnet 172.18.0.0/16? What is this? It's the network range. But is it a network range of your server, or is it a network range of your container network? Is it a network range for your Docker networks, or it's a server network range? It's a container networking range. It's a container networking range, not your server networking range. So if I create my containers in this network, does container IPs will be within this range? Does container IPs will be within this range? If I create a containers in this server, in this network, does my container IPs will be within this range? And if I inspect this default bridge, I can do something like this also. Docker network inspect or just inspect also works. If I'm inspecting the default bridge network, that I'm using ID, or you can use name also. Do you see the subnet range is different for the other other Docker network? If you see, what is the range for the default 172.17.0.6 Now if this is the case, does this guy will be able to communicate with this guy? This is in different Docker network, this is in different Docker network. Does this will able to communicate with this one? Whether you are using IP also, will it work? Whether you are using IP or name, will it work? No. So can I create a networking within Docker server itself? Can I have a multiple networks? Can I place my containers in a different networks in the same host? Container networking, that is software networking. Guys, 2 minutes. I am in my native. I am getting some kind of a circular. If you are from rural area, you know what is the meaning of circular. You might hear some background noise. Just 2 minutes. Announcement. Just 2 minutes. Okay, guys, I'll continue. I hope you don't have any background noise now. Okay, so I can create a multiple networks. In the Docker itself. Now, since the network range, that subnet range is different for these two networks, does containers in one network will be able to communicate with containers in other network, even though all are in the same machine? No. So this way, will I able to isolate my containers within same server also? Within same server also, will I able to isolate my containers for communication between each other using Docker networks? Now, let me delete. Let me delete these containers, whatever is running in a default bridge, I'm deleting. You may have a question, sir, why can't you create other containers in the other network? Why you are deleting and again creating? As I already told, will I able to create a more containers if my resources are very less in this server? If I have less CPU, less memory? No. So that's why I'm deleting. I'm deleting this first. Now, let me create a containers. Let me create a containers in that network. In this network, I'll create something like this. I'll do. Now I will use this option. I will use this option, but can I use one more option saying that hyphen network? Can I use that network name? Hyphen network. Can I use that network name? Something like this. Hyphen network. This network name, whatever network I created. Now, does this container will be created in this Docker network? Now, without creating a network, without having this network, if I do something like this, again, will it work? Without having network created, if I do something like this, does this container will be created? Without creating a network, if you do? No. Now, I have a network. Container is created. Now, let me inspect this. Let me inspect this container. This is the name of the container. Now, in which network that container is created, guys, if you see now? In this Python bridge, custom bridge. And what is this IP? What is this IP? 17.18.02. This is the container IP of that. This is my container name. Which container? One second. So I created a container for this image. So on which port that application is running, because this is my Java based Tomcat application, on which port this image is going to be running, on which port this container is running? 8080. Now let me deploy another container. Let me deploy another container also. I'll deploy that Python application. Let me deploy that Python application. If I have anywhere that, maybe let me do this. Why to waste the time? Let me do something like this. Python app in the same network, -p. I'm doing something like this, that host port. Even though I don't do the host port mapping, does this container will be able to talk to the Python container using container IP and container port, even though I don't do the port mapping with host? Does this container will be able to talk to that Python container even though I don't do port mapping using container IP and port? Yes. But if I want to access this application from outside, then do I need to do that port mapping, port forwarding? Yes. So let me do something like this. Same network. Let me use that image, that Docker hands-on. What is my image? I already have that image. I already have that image. Let me log into my registry. So this is my image, right? This is my registry, this is my repository, and I have a tag called color that one. So now using this image, I am creating a container in this Docker network. Now, is these two containers are in same Docker network? Again, that is custom network. Is these two containers are in same Docker network? Now this is the IP 172.18.0.3. 172.18.0.3. Now this application, will it able to make a API call to this application, something like this, using that container name Python app and that container port 5000? Can I make whatever API which is part of this container, which is part of this application? This is your Python app running on 5000 port. Let me show you. Let me go in any one of the container. Vice versa also, guys. Is this container can communicate with this container, and vice versa? Does this container can communicate with this container? Yes. So let me go inside this container. Since there is no code available, that's why I am showing manually. Since there is no code where from this application I am not making any API call to this application, that's why I'm manually going inside that container and showing. So curl this one. Can I use ping also if I want to see whether I am reachable or not? Can I use ping also? From this container, I am trying to ping this container using port, using IP. Is it able to reach that one? Now can I use this one also? Name also? Name also? Even though I am using name, is that name resolved to IP now? If you see, even though I am using name, is that name resolved to IP? So do we have kind of a DNS resolution within the containers in the custom bridge network? Now instead of IP, can I do something like this? Instead of using IP, can I use name also for making API calls? Am I getting a response like this now? Even though I am using name, is it resolved to IP and reaching that container and get the response? Slash API slash task, whatever. Am I getting the response like this? With the IP also will it work? With IP also will it work? Yes. But instead of using IP, can I use the name so that even though container is deleted and recreated with a different IP, still we can reach? But can I use this name, that container name outside of Docker, which means does this works here? In that server also, directly from the Docker server, same Docker server, is this name is resolved to IP? No. But within the containers, is that name will resolve to IP of the other container? Yes. So is everyone clear how one container can communicate with other container using networks in the Docker? What is the difference between bridge network and a custom bridge network? I mean to say, what is the difference between default bridge network and custom bridge network now? This is also an interview question. What is the difference between default bridge network and custom bridge network? You should be able to answer now, guys. Otherwise, it is like, the whole night you listen to Ramayana and morning you are asking Sita belongs to Rama. What is the relation between Sita and Rama? Same thing happens. After explaining all these things, if you don't explain what is difference between custom bridge and default bridge, same scenario. The whole night you listen to Ramayana and morning you are asking how Sita relates to Rama. So what is the difference between custom bridge and default bridge? In the default bridge, communication happens only using IPs, only IP addresses, container IP addresses. When it comes to custom bridge, does container communication can happen using the name also? That is your container name, kind of a host name or DNS? Yes. So this is how custom bridge works. Now let me create a one more container. Let me create a one more container. I'm creating another application, something like this. I'm creating one more container, something like this. Since I have not mentioned any network name, in which network this container will be created? In which Docker network this container will be created? Okay, so I think a Docker hands-on, there is a typo. There is a typo, Docker hands-on. So that's why it is saying this repository or registry does not exist, or it is saying Docker login is required. But it is not because of authentication, it is because of invalid registry name. So I have not given proper registry name. So now container is created in default bridge. Now from these two applications, will I able to reach this application, whether it's a database, whether it's an application or any other thing? Will I able to reach from these two? Will I able to reach this one? Because this container is created in which network? Bridge. This is the IP. This is the IP. Now I have one more container. This is the IP of that container. Now from this one or this one, will I able to reach this one now? Whether I use name or name of the container or IP of the container, will I able to reach now? Not possible. Let me show that. Let me show that. How can I prove that? Can I go in any one of the container, maybe this one or this one? Can I ping this container using name or IP? I'm interactively going inside this container. Now when I do ping using this name, is it result to IP? Is it saying unknown host? Now let's say developer is from this microservice, developer is making a call like this. Developer is making a call like this. Whatever API is part of that one, whatever application or API is part of that one, will it work? Even though the container is running, will this work? No, because they are in two different networks. Now, even though I use IP also, will I able to reach that server? I'm using this IP. Am I able to reach that? Sorry, not server. Will I able to reach that container? No, because they are in two different networks. So if I make any API call or network call, will it work? Something like this I am doing. Will it work? No. So does this works? Will it able to reach this one? No, because they are in two different networks. Now, is it possible for us to place containers in multiple networks? Which means this is in default network, this is in bridge network. Can I make this container also available in the default network, or can I make this container, I mean to say, can I attach this container to the custom network, or can I attach this container to the default network? Is that possible? Yes. If that is done, which means If I attach this container to the same network where this container is running, again, does these two can communicate? Kind of a attaching peering? Yes. So how to do that? There is a command for that. There is a command for that. So before attaching, let me show you this container. Before attaching, let me show you this container. As of now, in how many networks that container is there? As of now, how many networks that container is there? One. Now, you can do something like this. Docker network connect, Docker network connect, your network name. Docker network connect, your network name. Suppose I want to connect to this network, Python app bridge. Docker network connect, your network name and container name. I am going to use this container name. This container name. Now, does this container will be connected or attached to this network now? This is part of default now. Is that will be attached to this one also now? Now, once this is done, if you inspect, now in how many networks that container is there? Now, if you see once that is done. So, does it have one more IP for other network? Same container. Is it having one more IP 172.18.04 for this network? Now, does that container have two networks for each network different IPs? Once this is done, now is this going to work, guys? Now from this application, this is part of this network. Now will I able to reach this one? But not using this IP. Can I use this IP? The IP of other network? No, not using that IP. But can I use this IP? Can I use this IP? 172.18.0.4, 18.0.4. Now 3 not found redirection. So am I getting response now with that IP? I no need to use IP also. Can I use name? Because it is part of that custom network. Can I use the name of the container also? Java web app. Now is it resolving to that IP? 172.18.0.4 IP? Is it resolving to that IP? So this way, is it possible for us to connect one container to multiple networks using Docker Network Connect? The way I have connected, is it possible for me to disconnect also? The way I have connected, is it possible for me to disconnect also? Yes. If it is disconnected, again, now the container in how many networks? One. Now is this works again? Does this works again? No. Is everyone clear, guys? What is Docker network? What is default bridge network? What is custom bridge network? If required, can we attach containers to multiple networks? If you have a requirement, you will do. Otherwise, you will not do. But that is very rare, guys. You are not going to connect one container to multiple networks. That is very rare. But is Docker is providing that feature also? That feature also, yes. Is everyone clear? What is bridge, that is default bridge, and what is custom bridge, and how to create a custom bridge? If required, can I create n number of custom bridge networks also like this? Docker network ls. So if required, can I create a one more custom bridge network? Docker network create. Even though I don't give network name, the driver, even though I'm not using -d, is it going to use this default driver? Now if I see, is this network also created using the driver? And again, is that subnet range, is that network range is again different for this one? So is it taking 172.19? Yes. So this is how networks can be created and used in the Docker. Now The way we have a bridge network, custom bridge network, we have a one more network called host. We have a one more network called host. What is this host network? The name itself it is saying host. What is the meaning of host, guys? Server. The server network. The server network. So can I create a containers directly in the host networking by using something like this? Hyphen network host. That network name is host. Can I do something like this directly? Yes. So host, that is server network. If we create containers in host network, containers will not have IP address. Will not have a IP address. Does containers will get IP addresses if I create my containers in a host network? No, you will not get a IP address. So container will be created directly in host, that is your server. We no need to do host port mapping, that port publish or port mapping or port forwarding. We no need to do port publish or port mapping or port forwarding. We no need to do, because you are directly creating a host network. So in that case, can I access using that host IP, server IP, that host IP, and that container port? If the containers are created in host network, can I use host IP and container port directly? Yes. But the problem here is, can I create a multiple containers in a host network if the container ports are same? Which means, can I create n number of Tomcat containers or one Tomcat container, one Jenkins container in host network directly? No, because you are directly creating a containers in host network. Do you have a port conflict between your container ports? You are creating a containers directly in the host network. Yes. So let me show that. Let me show that. Let me remove all these containers, whatever I have. Now let me show you. Now I am creating a container like this, but I will mention network name, hyphen network host. Do I have a network with this name host? Even though use this hyphen p, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. So even though I use hyphen p, that is of no use. Now I'm directly creating a container in host network. D is missing. D, docker. D is missing. So let me use that. Now if you see, do I have a container running? You don't see anything related to port here because you created in the host network. Now if I inspect the container, in which network the container is created? Host. Do I have any IP address? Do I have any IP address for that container? No. So in that case, can I directly use that server IP and container port for accessing that application? This server IP and that container port? And that application context. Did I done the hyphen p port mapping, port forwarding when I am creating a container? No. Now can I create a one more container in host network again if that container image port is also same? Is this possible now? one more application, maybe Jenkins image or any other image, maybe this one. Now container name should be different. Container name should be different. I am saying container name as something like this. Now, if you see, it is showing 3 seconds ago, it is showing up. But after some time, if I see, is this is up and running? Is this container is up and running? If you see, no. So if I see why it is in exited state, what could be the reason? Why it is in exited state, what could be the reason? If I see the logs, will I able to understand something? Docker logs of this container. Why? What is this error or exception, guys? You already know. Bind exception address already in use. So can I have a one more container running on host network with same port? Same port? No. So is everyone clear what is host network and how it works? Now, is it possible for me to create a custom host network the way we created a custom bridge network? Is it possible for me to do something like this? Docker network create -d host driver. Is this possible? Custom host something like this? No. So what it is saying? Only one instance of host network is allowed. Will you able to create the way you created a custom bridge network? Will you able to create your own host network like this? No. Is everyone clear what is host network and how it works in the Docker? This is container networking, right? How containers can be created in which network. Now there is a one more network. What is this network name and what is the driver? Network name is none, driver is null. The name itself it is saying. Do you have any network? Do you have any network? I mean to say, does container will have any network? If I create a containers in none network or null network, will I able to access that container within the Docker or outside the Docker also? No. That is of no use. That is of no use, which means your process will be running. Will you able to access that process? That can be your application, that can be your database. If that is running in a none network, will you able to reach that application or database or any other thing? No. That is of no use. Again, if I create a container in none network, will I have a IP address for a container? If we create a containers in none or null network, basically containers will not have a IP address, and we cannot reach or access the process. That can be your application process, or that can be your database process, or anything. You cannot reach that application, that process, access the container. Within the container you will have some process, right? Within the container you will have some process. That can be your application, your database, or anything. You cannot reach or access the container from anywhere. From anywhere, which means within Docker or outside Docker, you can't reach. Just process will be running, but without reaching that process. Is it any use if you have this type of network created? You cannot reach that one. That is of no use. But they have provided for some reason. If you have that type of use case, can I create a container in a none network or null network? Yes. Now, out of these networks, default network, I mean to say default bridge, custom bridge, host, none, which network we will use in the applications in the actual projects? If you are using Docker, which network we will use? Some people are saying host, some people are saying default bridge. If it is a host, will I able to run n number of Tomcat applications in a same server? if I am using host network. Then will I able to isolate one container from other container using network level isolation? I mean to say, will I able to run multiple applications in the same Docker server if I create in a host network? No. So not in a host network. In which network most of the cases we will use? Custom bridge. Custom bridge, but that is not final again. If I am using only Docker, then custom bridge. But in real time, are you going to use only Docker? Will you be able to manage hundreds of containers with single Docker server? You have hundreds of microservices. Will you be able to deploy all your microservices using single Docker server, only Docker? No. In real time, you are going to use one more software. The way you have a containers, the way we have a containers, containerization. What is the one more important concept or tools we will use? Container orchestration. Container orchestration softwares or tools. What are the popular container orchestration softwares or tools? We have a Docker Swarm, we have Kubernetes, we have OpenShift, we have Mesios, something like this. So what is the problem with only containers? Why we need to use container orchestration tools? Just to give a high level overview, if something goes wrong with your container, does that container is getting recreated or rescheduled or automatically? If something goes wrong with your container, if you are using only containerization software, if something went wrong with your containers, container is killed because of some issue, containers are stopped, is the containers are recreated, restarted automatically? No. Will I able to scale my containers, which means I have only one container for that image, for that application? Will I able to scale that from one container to two containers, three containers, four containers? No. So do we have a load balancing in only Docker? If I cannot scale, even though I scale, do I have kind of a load balancing within the containers? No. I don't have a load balancing within the containers if I use only containers. So to overcome all these challenges, it is not possible to manage all the containers manually in the actual applications. Let's say I have thousands of 100 microservices. Is it possible for me to create all 100 microservices containers in same Docker machine? No. Now I will have a multiple Docker machines. I will have a multiple Docker machines. So if I have a multiple Docker machines, do I need to manage these containers in each and every Docker machine separately, or can I use some kind of a orchestrator who will manage for us? I no need to manage manually in these many servers. I will use orchestrator. What is that orchestrator? That is your Docker Swarm or Kubernetes. So if I have a multiple servers like this, can I use that Docker Swarm or Kubernetes? This is kind of a master or manager. So can I use this master or manager, this orchestrator, who can manage, who can schedule the containers in these servers, and who can manage the containers in these servers on behalf of me? Kind of a master or manager. I will ask this manager to deploy. I will ask this manager to deploy my containers. Does this manager will decide whether that containers can be scheduled in this node or that container can be scheduled in this node? If something goes wrong with this container, does the container will be recreated automatically by that manager swarm? Is that manager is looking after your containers? Yes. If I have something like this, is my containers will be in a same machine, guys? If I am using Docker Swarm, is my containers will be created in same machine? No. It will distribute it to multiple machines like this. In that case, does bridge network works? The container in one server will be able to communicate with container in another server if they are in a bridge network, whether it's a default bridge, custom bridge, whether it's a default bridge, custom bridge. Does this work? Can we have a bridge network between the containers which are in two different machines? No. If you see the scope of this driver, bridge driver, what is the scope? If you see here, it is saying local. What is the meaning of local? Is it only local to that machine? Only that machine? Yes. But if I am using tools like a Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, does bridge driver will work in these use cases? Now let's say this application is running here. This application is running here and other application is running here. Now, will I able to communicate from this application, this container to this container using bridge driver, bridge network? No. So if I am using Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, there is a different networking drivers. So that is overlay network or overlay driver, overlay network. We call it as a multi-host container networking. Multi-host container networking. What is the meaning of multi-host container networking? This overlay, multi-host, multiple hosts, multiple servers. Using this multi-host container networking driver like overlay, can I create a network between multiple hosts? I mean to say multiple servers. Can I create a container network? Now, if this container and this container is in a same overlay network, this container and this container is in a same overlay network, even though they are in two different servers, does this container can communicate using this container using container name or host? So in real time, are you going to use the bridge drivers? If you are using only Docker, yes, that is correct. But are you going to use only Docker in actual applications to schedule, to manage, to run hundreds of containers in your applications? No. So that is where other tools we will use, container orchestration tools like Docker Swarm or Kubernetes and OpenShift like this. So can I use some kind of a overlay? Kind of a overlay drivers, overlay networks? Yes. But with only Docker, there is no Docker Swarm created. There is no Docker Swarm initialized. Will I able to create a network with that overlay driver? Here, Docker network create -d overlay, that is overlay driver. Can I say something like this? Can I say something like this? Can I create a network, overlay network using this overlay driver? Are you getting error? Saying that this node is not a swarm manager, which means you have not initialized the Docker swarm. You have not set up the Docker swarm cluster. So since there is no Docker swarm initialized or set up, will I able to create a overlay network? No. But if I set up the Docker Swarm cluster, if I initialize the Docker Swarm, then will I able to create a overlay network using this overlay driver? Yes. So are you going to use bridge network? If you are using any container orchestration softwares like Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, are you going to use bridge drivers? No. We are going to use overlay networks. So what is Docker Swarm? Why do we need Docker Swarm? How to set up a Docker Swarm cluster? How to create a overlay networks, that we will discuss when we go for a Docker Swarm. When we go for a Docker Swarm. But till then, is everyone clear what is overlay driver? Why do we need overlay driver? Yes. So this is all about networkings in Docker. So similarly, if I am using Kubernetes also instead of Docker Swarm, if I am using Kubernetes as a container orchestration, do I have some kind of a network plugins? Kind of a network plugins? CNI, container networking interface. There are a lot of implementations for this container networking interface, like VNet, kind of network like VNet, Calico, Flannel. All these are networking solutions All these are networking solutions for a container networking interface. All these are implementations, kind of a overlay, implementations of overlay. Can I use any one of it, like a VNet or Calico or Flannel, like this? Any one to create a networking in the Kubernetes. For containers to communicate in Kubernetes cluster, you can use this any one of the network. So is everyone clear what is networking first in containers? Why do we need networking? What is bridge? What is host? What is null? What is overlay? Is everyone clear? Without this networking in the containers, does containers can communicate with each other? Does containers will have IP addresses and communicate with each other if you don't have this networking concept in the containers? No. I hope everyone is clear about this networking. In detail, I try to cover why network, what is network, what is container network, why do we need container network, what is bridge, what is host. So try to practice whatever has been discussed today. Tomorrow, I am going to start one more important concept, volumes. Volumes is nothing but storage. Networks is nothing but what? Communication. Image is nothing but what? Package. Container is nothing but what? Process. So can I run this process by creating a package? With the help of that package, can I start some process? That can be your database process, application process, that can be Nginx, that can be Jenkins, that can be Tomcat, that can be database also. Using this package, I can start the process. If I want to start, access this process from one application, if I want to access other application, one process, one container to other container, are we going to use the network concepts in the Docker? That is for communication. So similarly, this is storage. What is the meaning of storage? If the container is deleted and recreated, do you have whatever data which is part of the container file system in the new container? No. So can I use volumes concept? These volumes are nothing but mounts. These volumes are nothing but mounts. Can I mount my container directory with some storage? So does that container will store the data in that storage, in that mount? Mount is different, backup is different. This is not a backup. Volumes are not backup. Volumes are mounts. You are not taking a backup, you are mounting. Mounting in the sense, the container will write the data in that volume, in that mount. Backup is different, mount is different, guys. So that I'll continue tomorrow. Volumes. I thought I can cover that volumes also today, but I took most of the time explaining what is container, troubleshooting of the containers, networks, all these things. It took a lot of time. That's fine. I'll continue this volumes tomorrow. Once volumes is done, compose. Once compose is done, swarm. Once the swarm is done, Kubernetes. So this ECR also I will explain. Maybe sometime tomorrow or day after tomorrow we will explain. But it is nothing to do with Docker. ECR is one registry. Can I build something like this and tag with that ECR? I already explained, but only your question is how to authenticate with ECR. That I will explain tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow while discussing volumes itself, I will explain. Guys, this is, you should also understand yourself. ECR is just one registry. The way I am using Docker Hub, can I use ECR or Nexus or JFrog also? Can I tag my images with ECR or JFrog or Nexus? If I want to push, do I need to authenticate? Does commands will change? If I am using ECR, GCR, Nexus, does commands will change? No. But only doubt you have is how to authenticate with ECR. What is the username and what is the password for authentication? That I will explain tomorrow. Thank you guys. We'll see you tomorrow.